Hi, welcome to Killing SQL Slowly, the Grow webinar. I'd like to introduce Ben. He's a product marketer, or product manager, and he works making data more consumable, easier to understand. So with that being said, here's Ben.
Hello everyone, so glad to be here and present to you some of the things we've been working on and to kind of show you how we can make your life a little bit easier and not so full of coding with SQL. So here's kind of the agenda, what we'll talk about. We're going to introduce a little bit of SQL and then show 3 features that we have built or that we're going to be releasing soon that will really help you to find answers in your data a little bit quicker and make you more successful. So here's the deal about SQL. Many of you here in the webinar are familiar with SQL, and others are joining today because you haven't had much exposure to SQL. And so whether or not you're familiar with SQL, I think that we'll have something that will make your life a lot easier and hopefully make you a data hero at the end of the day as we kind of shorten the time that it takes to actually build out and consume the data that you have that you're working with every day. SQL is a powerful coding language, and with SQL you can do a couple things. The first is that you can communicate with the database to get all the data, pull it down from wherever the data is being stored. And then second, which is a little bit more of the focus that we have today, is how can we manipulate data to make it more consumable to build out charts and graphs in the system. This is an example of what a really simple SQL query would look like. It's pretty basic. But the thing about SQL is that it actually takes quite a bit of an investment to become more familiar with SQL. Even, just in a couple weeks, you can be really familiar with how to make some of the basic queries, but as you get more complicated, you need a little bit more time, and that's not something that everybody has, and so we want to make it easier. That's the goal, is to make it easier to build these charts and graphs. This is a metric or a chart that we track internally here at Grow. Over time, we've had about a quarter of all of the metrics that are built in Grow require some sort of custom SQL. And our first feature that we released, the pivot table, was back in November, and you can see that there's been a decline. And as the decline goes down, 15% in January of all of the charts that require SQL, that just means that it's getting easier and easier for you to create these views and use that data. So the first one that I want to show you then is the pivot. And so a pivot table is a way to categorize or group data in two different views or against two qualities or categories. And so here in this example, on the left side, the left column, we have the blue and green entries, and on the right side we have yellow and red entries. And a pivot table will help us to kind of break those out so we can see the commonalities between the two. And in the white space, we can perform some math or do some calculation that'll really show you, in this case, we've had a count. So how many of the rows had both green and yellow? So there were 2 of them. But you could do a count, you can do a sum, you can average some value. You can put whatever value in that white area, in the value area that you need. Here's an example of 3 charts that have been built using pivot tables. So you can see that on all 3 of these, the first grouping is by date, and then the second grouping are the stacked or the categories that we have there. So in the current projects, the second grouping is the completed or incomplete tasks that have been started for each of those dates or each of those weeks. And in the second one, the revenue by type, you can see that we've categorized by month, what are we spending, and then what types of expenses are those, what types of revenue are in each of those months. Again, this is what it looks like to build that one of those queries. But let's get into the product. I'll actually just show you an example of how you can use the tools that we've built to do this on your own without any coding. So here I have a data set, and in this data set, we have a number of expenses. So this chart is going to be called operational expenses. And so I have a list of all these expenses that happened with a date, and they've also been categorized by what type of an expense it is. So we have advertising and marketing, consulting, insurance, a bunch of other categories. So we want a chart that shows us each month how much did we spend for each of these categories. So all we have to do is come and we just start with the pivot table, and this modal pops out for us to be able to select the row source, so that's going to be on the left side. We want the date to be there. And we also can treat it as a date. So with SQL, you have to spend a lot of time transforming or making the data readable. And so this is a way to make it more readable. We're going to treat it as a date and then group these dates or all the entries by month so that they're all in the same bar. And then on the top, we'll take the details, which is the category that we had in that example. And then we're going to select a value, which happens to be called value, but that's just the number that was the amount that was spent for each of those expenses, and we're going to sum this up. Another thing that we can do here is, let me show you kind of a preview of what we have so far. So here it's already started grouping our data when I clicked done. We have the date here like we selected, and then we have, let me get a better view, we have all those expenses broken out by category. And one other thing that I want to do is that there's a lot of blank spaces in my data set, so I want to make sure that all those are automatically filled with 0 so that we have no confusion as to how much was spent. It's not missing data, it was actually a 0. And then now we can go ahead and just start charting this data set out, and it builds out the graph. Now we have by month, everything's categorized. The first category that I picked was salary. And we'll just go through and add each of the data sets so they stack on top of each other. And without any coding, now I'm able to build out a stacked chart that has 2 different groupings available here. Okay, so we'll go back here. All right, so the second capability that we're going to talk about is calculated columns. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just a way to take 2 fields and do some sort of math and create a third field that is based on that calculation between the other 2 fields. This is an example of a chart that has been created using some sort of calculation. We have here it's a conversion acquisition cost that's been charted. And so in this chart, there's data coming from multiple sources, like, for example, like Facebook and Google Analytics and Google AdWords. And so the concept is that I want to know how much did I spend, and then how many clicks or how many conversions did I get from that amount that I spent. And I can only do that using a calculation because those fields are all separate and it's not an automated field that comes in my report. That's what it would look like to do it in SQL. And we'll jump into the product again to show what it would look like to do here using our tools. The example that I'm going to show is a little bit different, though, from the scenario that I explained. In this case, we still have data coming from Google Analytics, or Google AdWords, actually. And with Google AdWords, it's kind of funny because the numbers come in. You can see the costs right here, something like, how many digits are there? Something like $9 million. There's no way I spent $9 million in advertising in October. And this happens with a lot of different data sources where the data will come in. You just need to clean it up and make it presentable, make it readable. And so what we're going to do is perform this every time this cost field comes in from Google AdWords. We just have to divide it by 1,000,000 to make it show the exact number that we spent for that time period. So we'll come in here and type up a new column name after we select the the calculator icon, and we just start typing. And right as we start typing, all of our options that we have available show up here. So we can do cost, and then we'll divide it by 1,000,000. And this will go through and perform that calculation automatically. And we can see here on the right side, now we have a new column called spend that we just created, and those numbers as they've been calculated. So another thing that we can do, there are a few other calculations that can be that we can use in this section. Let's say perhaps that we just want to round it up to the nearest dollar rather than the exact number of, the exact change that we use. So we can come in and do some of these spreadsheet functions that I'll show you a link to where you can access some of those after this example. But we're going to round it now, and now it's rounding up to the nearest dollar instead of having those. So easy way to clean up the data and do some transforms. You can do the simple math like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, as well as a few others. And without having to do any coding, we're able to just transform the data and make it more readable. So we have a question coming in here, so I'll read it. It says, on financial data, I'm using QuickBooks. In order for Grow to produce reports, would I need to export my data into a Google Sheets spreadsheet? So the answer, yeah, that's a great question. You don't need to export it. The only reason I've exported into a spreadsheet here is just to make it easier for the demonstration. But any of the data sources, we have an integration with QuickBooks, any of the other integrations that we have, as that data comes in, you can perform these calculations on the fly without having to export it into a spreadsheet. We can do it right from the tool. And so it makes it really easy just to get that data down and then go ahead and perform whatever calculation or even a pivot table on that data. Good question. So you can find more. We have documented how you can use the calculated table or the calculations, what do I call it, custom calculations on our help site. So if you go to help.grow.com and search for calculated columns, there will be more documentation on the functions that are available to use as you're transforming your data using that tool. The last feature that I want to present to you is actually a feature that hasn't been released. It's in development right now, and we're going to be releasing it within the next week. So we're really excited for that. Some of the examples that we've already shown you kind of allude to this need as well. We had the example where we had data coming in from Facebook and from AdWords, and in order to get that all on the same spreadsheet or on the same view to be able to perform any calculation, you'd have to perform some sort of a join. And so a join is when you have two separate data sets or tables, and they have a common value. So we have red. That's the commonality between these two tables. And you just want to match up each of the rows so that you have one data set all using the same common value. So you can see, if red was a date, then you would see, on that day, here's what we spent in AdWords and here's what we spent in Facebook ads or something like that. Another example would be if you're taking like a general ledger of all the products or all the sales or transactions that you've had, and then you want to see what the cost was for the products that you sold. And so in the ledger, it only says the revenue that you get, and the cost that you have is in maybe some other, maybe in the catalog. And so the common value would be the product ID, and then you can then supplement your ledger with how much you spent for each of those products. So that's an example of when this is used. This is one way that joins are illustrated. There's a left join where that would be like on the left side you have the ledger and on the right side you have the catalog, or there's an inner join where you only want to match any row that has an exact match. these are the two most common, in our research we found that these are the two most common types of joins that are being used in our system, a left join and an inner join. Here's kind of a way that I like to think about it. You keep everything in the left join, you keep everything from the left data set and only the matching values from the right. And then on the right side, the inner join would be keep only the matching from the left and the right. And since we don't have it developed, I just have some screenshots of what that would look like. So this is how you do it in SQL. And this is the update that we're going to be pushing, where to add a new or to join two reports together, we have this option down here on the right side where you click Add Joined Reports, and you click on that, and it creates a new report. You can see in the middle there where it says Joined Report 1. And then on the left side, we have now our interface where we can select what are the two reports or the two data sets that have that value in common. And then you can make the selection for the common value and then whether you're going to do a left join and an inner join. This makes it a lot more simple to consolidate all the many metrics that are being, that you're creating or that you're pulling to create one metric, right? So all the many data sources, whether it's Facebook, AdWords, whatever it is, put them all into one chart and then see so you can track activities all at the same time on the same chart. So those are the enhancements that we have coming up. You know, we really hope that this will simplify your lives, make you the data hero, like that quote that we had earlier. And you know, we look forward to your feedback. We have another question here. There's one question here. It says, isn't the code behind your table SQL? Yes. Yeah, so SQL is definitely, let me think. So as we built these capabilities, everything that happens is SQL behind the interface that we see. So we've simplified it by making it so that we write the SQL or the tool pre-populates any of the SQL, so you don't have to do any of the actual writing, but it does use SQL and it does come from a SQL database. We have a second question here. It says, please go through how you would extract data from a SQL database. That's a great question. So we have an integration within our product. We have a number of databases that we already connect to. And I don't have a view of that here available, but what you would do is find what type of database it is. So it could be MySQL or Postgres or some other database. And you would select that data source, whatever the database is that you're using. And in this case, you would have to be able to use the SQL to select the correct tables out of the database and display them. And so, so if you're using the SQL database, you do have to know a little bit to populate the initial set of data. From there, though, the transformations that you'd want to make, such as a pivot table, calculated columns, or some sort of grouping or something like that, that can be handled within the interface from what we presented here. So good question. You still, I think, you know, the underlying thing is if I only have a SQL database, or that's my way of accessing the data, you would still need to know a little bit of SQL and to get the initial set, and then you can use our tools. One thing that I didn't mention too is that we have a fantastic customer success team. Probably a lot of you have already met with them and used them and you know them by name even. They're really good at helping you with some of the more complex things. So if you ever run into a situation where it doesn't seem like the tools given are quite enough for what you need, they're definitely on board and ready to help out with any of those more complex queries that you might need to make. Another question says, it appears joining can be done currently inside of the spreadsheet. After the update, this will be able to be done within Grow, correct? Yeah, that is correct. So we have a section in Grow called the spreadsheet functions. And one way that people have been doing joins is by importing a whole column into the spreadsheet function. And so it's not, we found that usability isn't quite that simple. And so it'll still be available. You can still use those same things. It won't break any of the metrics or charts that you've created using that technique. But now it'll definitely be easier to do that without having to fill out any spreadsheet function. You can just use that this view that I showed here at the end. So somebody's asking here if we have another calculated columns example. Okay, so it says, for example, can you show us how to calculate data from Google Analytics or another product without exporting it into Excel? So let me pull up the web browser here. Let me clear, I'll use this data set. I'll just remove under the transforms. This has a little bit more, it doesn't quite have that much. Let me pull up a different example where we can do some of those. Here's one. Okay, so in this data set, I have a list of HR data that I made up, and it has a list of all the employees in a company, as well as the salaries they're making, and any of the HR expenses that are made for that salary, right? So let me some of these we can see. We have an annual salary, we have a biweekly pay amount, we have yearly benefits. So let's say, for example, that we wanted to take, yearly benefits and annual salary to see what exactly are we spending per employee. And so I can come in here and say, add the calculated column. We'll call it like total burden or something like that. And then we'll start typing in here. So we have annual salary, automatically populates, and then we can hit plus, and then yearly benefits. Oops. All right. And then we'll hit done. And over here on the right side, now we have a new column called total burden. And it has the addition of those two fields together. So now we have a total column. And we can that can be used now in the pivot table. So if you wanted to pivot and say, how much are we spending per department? So I think the field is called group name. And then we'll say, what's the type? So, we want to split it up between part-time, full-time, and contracted employees. And then come down to the bottom to our new column and say total burden. We want to sum those up. And so now we have a chart here. We have a table that shows us how much each group is spending for each of these types. And that's not just the salary. That's a combination of the salary and the benefits. And so, there's another example of how you can use the calculated columns. Okay, so we'll wrap up now. Let me go back. I just wanted to show again the website that you can go to for help on any of these. If you go to help.grow.com, we have a lot of help there, articles written that will help you to be more successful and make your life a bit easier. And then the other thing is that I love to get feedback. And so, if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me or feedback. That'd be great. What are some other things that you find yourselves needing to do in SQL that you'd like to be more simple? and how can we simplify and make your life easier. So thanks for joining the webinar, and look forward to hearing from you more.